I'm gonna call the meeting to order. Can we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, hold on. So the next is an approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda for tonight?
Make that motion.
I'll second it.
Any discussion or any changes? I don't have any. So, all right, all in favor? And any public input and announcements? I didn't have anybody email. Did you have any?
Not aware of any.
All right, can I have a motion for the approval of the minutes for November 1st?
I'll make a motion to approve them.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thanks. Any discussion or any changes on those? All right, all in favor? And on to the next is a Clarendon update.
So Clarendon update is just me tonight. I told my teachers I knew they had a lot on their plates and that if they really want to come join me, they were more than welcome to, and I gave them an overview of what I wanted to talk about, got some ideas from them, and here we are. So start out, trying to do it a little backwards. I know the principal updates usually at the end, but what's up at CES? So curriculum and bookworms has been a big start to our year. I noticed classroom doing some shared reading right there. It's been going, it was a little bit of a slower start, kind of getting used to a new program, but everybody has really taken off of it, and we're going strong now. Our PBIS rollout this year looked a little bit different. In addition to just teaching the expectations, we actually collaborated with Connie and got buses here. So the kids got to go on the bus and learn bus expectations, and we had them out at recess learning playground expectations and practicing in spaces, but at different times. So when they went out to the playground, we were actually at recess. It was just at a different time in their day. Community events, we've had a costume parade, and we had a whole school scavenger hunt, in addition to all the PTO events that have been going on lately. And tomorrow is our big Thanksgiving luncheon, and we will have over 100 grown-ups coming to attend with their kiddos. So we're looking forward to that. And then just the focus of today is going to be a lot surrounding our data, because that has been a big focus for us this year. No worries. So one of the things I wanted to talk to everybody about tonight was a big thing that we looked at last year in our continuous improvement plan was our behavior data. So we looked at the data and we analyzed the trends that we were seeing of like where are things happening, when are things happening, because behavior weighed on us a lot last year and everybody was feeling it. And this year, thanks to our new Adjourn software, got some nice graphs to go off of. So I wanted to kind of compare last year's data to where we are this year and then look at what we're doing this year to address those things, because behavior impacts our classrooms, it impacts our students' abilities to learn, not only students who might be having some challenging behaviors, but also the other learners in the classroom. So one of our big things was just getting used to sharing data and collecting data. Last year, we had referral forms, and they were green slips, and it was kind of still thought of as like a ticket system for kids, almost like here, like you need to go to the office. And I had a lot of office referrals. I was handling a lot of behavior that was going on, and so we've changed it this year. We call them behavior observation forms, or behavior observation data forms. So they're BODs, because we love an acronym. So the data is being used to track what's going on. So it could be a classroom managed behavior. that doesn't come to me. It could be a behavior that might be a little bit bigger that does come to me. And what that does is it helps us to implement supports and to measure and monitor the effectiveness of those supports in our classrooms. So you'll notice last year's data is blue. This year's data is orange. And if you look at it, you're probably like, ooh, wow, that doesn't look great for you. It's just because we're actually collecting more, and teachers are seeing the value of services that we're able to implement or supports that we're able to implement for students. And so we're seeing more people tracking, and not necessarily everything that we see results in a specialized plan or anything, but it does help if we have a student that does need a little bit extra support. So we are going to see a bit of a spike in our data this year, and as we go through the year, we're going to work with BJ to fine-tune the Adjourn system. Some things we look at is time of day. So one of the big areas that we noticed last year was that 11 to 12 p.m. time, which is recess and lunch. Another thing that we looked at was place. If you notice, last year's data says no location. We weren't able to sort it out, but I went through all the behavior forms for our continuous improvement plan and gave everybody graphs for that, but our EduClimber system didn't quite transition over that way. But of course, other than the classroom, which if you think about specials and regular classrooms, we have 15. So that's less than 2 incidents per classroom. If you look, the biggest one is the athletic field or recess. So projected supports after our plan last year was, what we wanted to do with that was continue with our PBIS model. We applied for a grant for staff training, so we wanted to increase our tier 2 supports because what we realized was we have a lot of great universal systems, and then we have our foundations program, but we don't really have anything for students in between who might just need like a check-in and a check-out. So we had our restorative room, is what we call it. So it creates a check-in and check-out program for students, or a scheduled break time for students throughout the day, or if they're just feeling like they need a minute to regulate in a quiet, safe space, then they can advocate for themselves for a break and go. We have planned for having Paula Reynolds, our school counselor, 5 days a week, working with kids in small groups, one-to-one, and pushing into classrooms to do some social emotional learning. We had a .2 counselor position who was going to coordinate with our restorative room. She has a big title of a home to school coordinator because she works on attendance as well as supporting students. So that's Kathy Manley in that restorative room. And then putting in place a community block, because relationships matter, and the data always points to that students who feel safe and connected in their classrooms have better experience at school. We also wanted to increase our ESTs to being bi-weekly. So last year they were once a month, and we just felt like it's not enough. We're not getting to enough kiddos, and we're not able to help enough. So, and then obviously that recess time, increasing supervision. What actually has come to fruition, and what we're actually been able to put in place, still going with that PBIS model. We got the grant. It's exciting. We're going to get to send some people to some trainings this year. We have our restorative room with Kathy Manley. Unfortunately, due to staffing and needs for counselors in the district, Paula goes, it's very fortunate for Tinmouth. She gets to go up to Tinmouth for once a week, but that leaves us 4 days a week without a counselor. And then we lost our .2 counselor position because of other needs in the district. We do have a community block. We have a half-hour set aside every day where staff who aren't necessarily in the classroom get to push in, and they get to participate in a morning meeting. And they look very different in every classroom we go into. And it's nice because some staff go into multiple classrooms throughout the week and get to connect with different learners. And it's just good for our learners to get to connect with different grown-ups throughout our building. And then we're really learning and growing together. Monday we met for our building-based day, and we just talked about the differences in our morning meetings and what that looks like and some of the strengths of those morning meetings. And our plan is not only for me to push into classrooms to participate and observe and model, but also to take over a morning meeting so that classroom teachers can go into other classrooms and see what it looks like in other classrooms. We did increase supervision at recess. That's still going well. We do have the EST bi-weekly, although because of staffing and things, sometimes we get pulled out of a meeting to go help support. And then just in general, like we don't always have enough staff to support all of our learners as best as we would like to. So that's kind of where we see some of our behavior data and things that we look at trending not in the direction we want. But with that said, results. We know some of it is working because we have a reduction in the number of student being monitored for attendance. So part of Kathy's job in that restorative is to work with students who are struggling with truancy. It's down 50% this year, in part of students last year who we had meetings with them. They started coming to school, and then we're just being more proactive in addressing it this year. I wish I brought her data binder that she gave me. It's just that she keeps such meticulous information and data about students, and we're constantly checking in. But it's also resulting in a lot of cases with increased parent involvement and communication. We have better utilization of the supports we have, and we're monitoring the effectiveness and where the need is. We're doing really data-driven decision-making when it comes to behavior supports because they're tied to a plan this year. It's not just, hey, you need a break, I'm just going to send you out to go see Mrs. Reynolds, or hey, you need a break, I'm going to have you go check in with somebody else. These students have a plan, and we're working with classroom teachers to boost those strategies in the classroom and supports that they can do themselves in the classroom. And then we're able to filter out kind of that tier 2 behavior versus tier 3 behavior and accessing supports for students more quickly. Challenges this year to our needs. PCBs forced us out of a couple of key spaces in the school, which then caused kind of a domino effect of having to move rooms around. We're very fortunate in the sense of this whole half of our building is brand new, so we didn't have to worry about it. But if you look, I put the library in there because I don't know if anybody has had a chance to go into our library this year at the start. Our new librarian, Allison Coda, did a phenomenal job of setting it up, and it was so beautiful. And then within a couple of weeks, it was like, oh, hey, by the way, you gotta move that whole library, and you get one tiny classroom to get to do it. So this is the classroom she moved it into, and it looks just as beautiful, and it's cozy, and it's comfortable, and she's created just a wonderful space. So I do have to give her a shout out. Just other challenges, as I mentioned, staffing needs, the counselor positions. Super excited that we have hired an OT for the district. That's going to be super helpful for all of us. Higher supports for learners, and then just that constant substitute need. We're heading into the sickness season, and staff that are, attending more in PD, and it just, you get that everybody's chipping in, and we're trying to play that constant game of chess to cover everybody. And then the last thing is burnout. And burnout is being felt a little bit in October this year, which is unusual. And I think a lot of it had to do with, we had the new curriculum, and then we lost some supports of people moving on to other positions. And so people are, picking up the slack and doing that, but it was definitely being felt a lot. But that said, this group of Clarendon staff is doing a fantastic job supporting one another, jumping in whenever they can. They do a great job of just, even without me having to go say anything, they're just like already there for their colleagues, communicating their needs and being part of creative solutions. I love that I have a staff that's not afraid to come to me and tell me what's going on, and then also saying, yes, this is our challenge, and here are some thoughts that I've had about it. What do you think? People are being really flexible. You see our pre-K students right there putting the puzzle pieces together. But they're taking on new curriculum, jumping in with commitment, and taking on a lot of new initiatives, I guess I would say. And then I end you with just a few, if you have questions, but there's our band getting ready for our Christmas concert, which is coming up on November 29th. It's a little earlier. And then today, this was like the highlight of my day, was walking in and seeing a class up here on the roll call. I'm terrified of it, but working together to support their students. So it's a belaying system where they all back up and pull as the person climbs. So they have to work together for that. And then just some learners who were doing some outdoor learning and exploration. But any questions? I know I talk really fast. It's me.
I think it's really for the attendance and having parents more involved, because I think we were just in a budget meeting thing, and one of my things was like, well, we can't solve a lot of problems, but having parents be more involved is one of those things that we know adds more success. So
Yeah.
just like, if there's those kids on that lower edge, it seems like if you have figured out a way to interact with those parents.
Yeah, and I mean, we try to be really flexible of like, oh, you know, it might be hard to get here because you're at work. Well, we can do a phone conversation, you know. Emailing back and forth has been really helpful, but just kind of getting them to understand like, hey, we're here to help and support and do whatever we can to get kiddos at school. That's our ultimate goal.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think what I love about what Jane shared tonight was she shared the good and she shared the bad. She shared the plan that they put in place and how it didn't actually work out exactly as they had planned, but they've made progress. And I think that's what we're asking of everybody. When the board did goal setting, that's what we were thinking about. What can we do to improve? And I hope you see that our administrators are doing that work, and I hope you know that our teachers are too. We know we're not perfect. And if we actually confront that we have some problems in front of us, we can be creative and we can track to see if we're making progress or not. And we can share that with the public. And I think that's important that we're doing that work. So huge thanks to Jane for that.
So the next item is Board Education of Finance.
Hey, that's me. So this will be the most fun we've had in years, I'm sure. Did anybody, and I don't expect the answer to be yes, but did anybody catch the VSBA webinar yesterday? No. If you did not, I would highly recommend, and I'll send it out when I see it, watch it when it comes out. Hopefully they'll have it by next week. It's some really interesting information about Act 127. So jump on page 2, basis in legislation, and I'll talk about that briefly. Just so that folks know where some of the foundation of education finance in the state came from, Act 160 in 1997 was really where we got the foundation of how we fund schools now in Vermont. There was a court case that argued that some schools were funded in a way that was unfair. So some communities were able to fund their schools very well, and some communities struggled to fund their schools. And the argument in that case was that that was against the Constitution in Vermont, that the Vermont Constitution guaranteed every student equal access to education. So coming out of that court case, the legislature took up that question and passed Act 60. And the goal of Act 60 was to level the playing field, would be one way of putting it, so that communities that didn't have a large tax base could still support schools in those communities. Coming out of Act 60, for several years, there were some challenges where some communities who could fund their schools better were a little frustrated that they were not able to fund their schools to the level that they wanted to. So they felt that they were at a disadvantage now. Leveling that playing field was great for the people who couldn't fund schools, but the people who could felt like they lost something. So 2003, about 6 years later, Act 68 addressed some of the concerns coming out of Act 60. One of those concerns was what these communities that historically could fund their schools well, they put into place a tax penalty for excess spending above 125% of the last year's average. So it gave those towns this buffer of 25% where they wouldn't hit a tax penalty. So locally they could increase their school funding if they chose to do so, and they had the tax base where they could do that. So that tweak to Act 60, that update, and some other things put in place, 2003. Here we come today, 20 years later. Act 172 was passed in 2022, but the work for that act, it had been studied for probably about 2 or 3 years before it was passed in 2022. Act 172 is trying to address what some folks see as a fundamental problem with Act 60. When Act 60 was passed to level the playing field, certain weights were assigned to students. And those weights were not necessarily based on any empirical data. So it was decided that high school students were weighted more than elementary students, because obviously high school students need more things and supports than elementary students, right? Seems reasonable. But there was no data that they were looking at when they made those decisions. So these pupil weights that we've been using for 20 years here, or actually more than 20 years since Act 60, a lot of folks were arguing were not appropriate and did not actually fund our schools in a way that supported our students. So Act 172 is designed to update those pupil weights. So there are different categories where students who are disadvantaged socioeconomically, so students on free and reduced lunch, things like that. That category of students, the legislature recognized, based on data from studies that were done, that those students needed more in order to succeed. So that's one example. English language learners would be another example of a category that in the past was not weighted, did not receive more funding, but coming out of this study and what was passed in Act 127, we are now funding schools more for those categories. So questions on those 3 quick summaries of the legislation. Bruce?
Keep referring to 172. Is that 127?
I'm sorry, I'm transposing those.
Okay, I was looking for the other
127. I'm sorry, 127. Thank you. So I grabbed the next slide from the VSBA presentation yesterday, so I borrowed this because I thought this was a reasonable summary of why the legislature felt that this was an important thing to do. It is still based on that constitutional requirement for equal access that Act 60 came out of, but their argument was that Act 60 and 68 didn't actually solve the problem. So we need to do more to solve the problem. Now the interesting thing about this, the last bullet point there, the effects of these adjustments to weights are being addressed by a phased-in approach to implementation over the next 5 years. This weighting study was great, and then we started looking at, well, what are the implications? Well, the implications would be that some districts would receive more and some districts would receive less. So how do we transition in a way that we don't just look at a district and say, oh, guess what, your budget is short a couple $1 million, good luck, you know? Or we say to another district, hey, your budget's up $500,000, you know, do whatever you want with that funding. Because this was designed for that funding to go to support students. So we're going to talk a lot about what the legislature put in place for this 5-year transition plan. That gets convoluted and complicated on top of a system that's already really challenging to understand. But for our budget season this year, we absolutely have to understand this 5-year transition. If we don't, we could make a move this year that disadvantages us for 5 years. So that's an interesting scenario because in the past, passing a budget didn't necessarily have those built-in 5-year implications. Now we've got to build a budget, and if we do it a certain way, we set ourselves up for 5 years of easier budgeting. If we do it a different way, we set ourselves up for 5 years of really challenging budgeting. And I think that's interesting because that puts a lot more weight on our process this year than we normally have. Questions on that? Okay. So how is this stuff funded? I just thought it was interesting to know that You've got chunks going into the education fund. Some of that is coming from sales tax. Some of that is coming from the lottery, a really tiny piece actually from the lottery. And big chunks are coming from non-residential property tax and then our homestead property tax. So businesses or second homes, that non-residential tax is going to support our education fund a good bit. But then our homestead property tax is supporting the education fund a fairly large chunk too. So when we talk about budgeting and we talk about our communities and we talk about taxes, that homestead slice is really what we're talking about. That's where funds are raised locally to support our schools. So I just thought interesting to know where the other contributions into the ed fund are coming from. So district tax rate calculations, just a refresher of how do we actually get to a tax rate? How does that work? Well, the first steps we are doing, as we always do, we put forward a budget. So we're going to be making some projections. We're going to be looking at what happened last year. We're going to be collecting information from as many places as we can. We had our budget forum at 6 p.m. over at Mill River tonight. We heard from some community members, some staff members, some board members. We take all of that information, we take the numbers, we take the hopes and dreams that people are sharing with us about for our schools, and we try to put together a budget that balances the hopes and dreams with the tax impacts on our communities. We get that to town meeting day, and we get a yes or no vote on that. Eventually, we pass a budget. Locally, we calculate our spending per pupil. So based on that budget that we put out on town meeting day, we're going to look at the total expense in our budget, and we're going to divide that by the number of students that we have. So that's something that we control locally. How large our budget is, and that number that we get when we divide that by the number of students. So we have some control of some of our budget. But then the state does calculations too. And the interesting thing is we don't know what a town tax rate is going to be until the state starts doing their calculations. Actually, we don't know what our district's tax rate is going to be until the state starts doing their calculations. The state has to look at everybody's budget. And that large pool of money that needs to be raised to fund every single budget across the state's going to look at that number, and the state's going to make some predictions, and the state's going to give us a yield. And based on that yield number, if our per pupil cost is above or below that yield number that the state comes up with, our tax rate may go up or down. So that's a really interesting piece where we can do everything we want to try and target a certain tax rate. But when we get that yield number, things might change. And that yield number is going to come to us December 1st. So we do have a little bit of time to take that yield number into consideration. Interestingly, this year, a lot of folks are communicating from state agencies that their confidence in the yield number is lower than it has been in previous years.
What does that mean, confidence in the yield number?
Yeah, that's, I think, an important thing to understand. When we get the yield number on December 1st, we're going to calculate a district tax rate. We're going to use that tax rate when we do our ballots. That tax rate can change. In the spring, the legislature can do some work and that yield might change. Actually, last year we saw it fluctuate. Stan, do you remember? It was pennies, but it fluctuated, right? So small fluctuation last year. Confidence in the yield means how confident are people that that yield number is going to just fluctuate a little bit. This year, folks are not predicting at all that it's going to be stable, and I think folks are nervous that it might not be, which has some big implications. That means we could pass a budget based on projections, and that could all change after we've passed the budget. Changing pennies is not the biggest deal in the world, but if you change 20 cents, you know, that's a big impact. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Act 127 implications and why that yield number could become challenging. Okay, questions so far?
I got one.
Yeah, Bruce.
You say the state does the calculation.
Yes.
Who precisely where does it all begin in the state? I know it just didn't dump into Congress.
Yeah, so Brad James, who works with the Agency of Education, does a lot of the calculation work. The yield, though, actually comes from, remind me, the Department of Tax Commissioner.
It's actually the legislature that actually sets the final rate, probably sometime in May.
Right, but somebody's figuring this all up to present to them.
Yeah.
All right.
So tax commissioner is going to give us the number on December 1st. There's probably been a lot of communication among different organizations to get to that prediction. Brad James is doing a lot of the work. Once we get the details, he tells districts, okay, this is what it means for you. But then it really is going to be the legislature that sets the final number. And that's why in December 1, we might get something different from what the legislature does in the spring. Good question, Bruce.
So the December 1st number is a prediction?
Yes, it's a projection.
Forecast.
Absolutely. Yep. And always has been while we've operated under Act 6068. So that has not changed. What has changed, and the word we keep hearing, if you watch the VPA or the VSBA webinar, you'll hear a lot of different people use the word uncertainty. The system has not fundamentally changed, but we've introduced a lot more uncertainty into it. That's the challenge this year. But remember that other challenge of what we do this year can have a 5-year impact. Gosh, there's more uncertainty, but gosh, we better get it right because it's got 5-year implications. So I think, again, a reason why this year is an important year to make sure that we're paying attention and making some strategic choices around budget.
So Brian,
Yeah, Paul?
so what are the inputs into that number that they feel unsure?
The yield. Yeah. So the yield, a lot of that is going to come from all the districts in the state setting their budgets. So if budgets get set really high, that's going to have implications for setting that yield number, because the yield, you can think about that as what it takes to fill the coffers. So if we need this much, we need to set the rate here to fill the coffers to pay for all of that. If budgets are all really low, that's got implications for the yield because you don't need to fill the coffers as much. So part of that is based on thinking about how do we raise enough funds to cover all these obligations. The tricky thing is districts all can set obligations however they want, and if a budget passes, the state is obligated to fund it. So this yield is a way of trying to figure out how to fund what everybody's asking for.
Our property valuations, and there's been some serious changes in a lot of places.
We're not even there yet.
We're not
even there yet.
He's getting to that.
We're not even there.
For
Yeah.
that
Or like,
Yeah.
is the fact that, so like, usually when Stan gives us a number of what he thinks, like, what our budget will be,
Yep.
that's based on the past calculations of what it's been in the past. So part of that uncertainty is the fact that there is a whole new calculation that has to occur,
Bill.
that inherently has different,
Let
or is
me-
that not?
Thank you, Jane. Actually, I think the uncertainty is coming from a little different place, and I'm going to get to that. Any other questions here? This is the nothing has changed zone still. As complicated as some of this is still nothing is different yet. This is how it's always been. Just a bigger level of uncertainty. Okay, so then what? After we do all of that, we get the yield number, December 1, we think we know where our district tax rate is going to be. Common level of appraisal comes in. And so we have this mechanism in the state where towns that have a high tax capacity and towns that have a low tax capacity can fund their schools the same way. So the same amount of, the same rate, the same tax rate in two towns can fund their schools the same way. And that's based on that property valuation. So a town that can't raise enough, when all that money goes into the coffers, the state sends enough. That town that raises plenty has sent some to the coffers, and they don't need any to come back. Common level of appraisal is the way that the state can make sure that your property values are accurate enough. If those property values matter a lot in how much funding you get for your schools, common level of appraisal is a way of double checking and making sure, you know, let's look at the sales that you've had recently. Let's make sure that your tax values on paper don't look lower than they really should be in reality. So common level of appraisal is going to come in and adjust. So your district tax rate gets translated into a town tax rate.
Can I interject something?
One quick thing. So we will have one district tax rate, but each of our towns will have a different town tax rate once that CLA comes into place and maybe adjusts it up or down. Sorry.
I'm just recalling that it was a year or two ago, the Vermont School Board Association recommended that school boards speak to their legislators about moving away from CLA.
Yep. It's a final adjustment that people aren't necessarily prepared for, and I think it's tough to separate out, well, what is the district's impact on your taxes? What is the CLA's impact on your taxes? It's tough to separate that out, but it's another layer added on after we get our district tax rate. We can't control CLA at all. So Tinmouth last year, I think, had a large adjustment because there were some property values, some properties sold, and it triggered CLA, and the town rate was higher because of it, even though our district tax rate was really reasonable last year. There's also income sensitivity. So if a resident's income is below a certain threshold, you could have a very valuable property but be on a fixed income. You're not taxed based on that whole property value. You are still taxed, but that what you're taxed is decreased because of your income level. That's an interesting thing just to think about. And I've heard numbers from 65 to 75%. It fluctuates. The 65% number is probably from about 5 or so years ago. That roughly 65% of Vermonters paid based on income, so they met that threshold. It's something like, recently it's been maybe $130,000 for a household. So if your income is below about $130,000 per household, this triggers income sensitivity and your property bill is going to be lower. So if you did the math on your town tax rate against the value of your property, you would see that your bill is lower. Actually, I think they rebate you, actually. They tell you what your bill would be, but then they maybe...
Yeah, I think it's one of the line items.
Okay. So they show you that on your tax bill. Questions? Okay, now we get to the uncertainty part. But what does Act 172 do to this? I'll remind you that the purpose of Act 1, I did it again, Bruce, 172, I'm sorry. What does Act 127 do to this? The purpose of Act 127 was to better support students with greater needs. It was to set those pupil weights in a way that was based on data. So the goal is to get funding to students. I think that's an interesting thing to keep in mind. So the legislature has put some things in place to make sure that happens. Because if the legislature said, hey, we're giving you more funding, but they didn't tell you how you had to use that funding, you could really easily turn around and that would turn into tax breaks. But since the purpose of Act 127 was to fund schools where the needs were higher, they've put some things in place to ensure that those dollars go to support students, which is really interesting. So district tax rate increases are capped at 5% as long as per pupil spending does not increase more than 10%. And that happens for 5 years as long as you hit that target. If you don't hit that target in year 1, you no longer have that rate cap. If you don't hit that target in year 2, you lose it for subsequent years. If you have the rate cap for 3 years but then don't hit it, you miss out on the last year. So as long as you hit the target, you continue to avail yourself of that 5% tax rate cap. Okay, that's interesting. So I tried to give you a visual of what that kind of means, because we're talking about two different percentages. We're talking about sorry, I didn't mention the 10% per pupil spending. If your per pupil spending goes over 10%, you trigger a review and you're probably going to lose that rate cap. If your rate is below 5%, you're going to lose that rate cap. So there are two different ways of losing that rate cap, but they're two different things we're talking about. So on the left-hand side, your district tax rate. On the right-hand side, your per pupil spending. So, and this I think was one of the most confusing parts for me initially. I mean, this was 6 months ago, Stan and I were trying to read the legislation, and we're like 10%, 5%, 10%, and I kept having the hardest time realizing that these are two different thresholds. The 5% is your tax rate, the 10% is your per pupil spending. If you're under 5% district tax rate, you lose your cap. As soon as you lose your cap, you never get it back. If you're above a 10% per pupil spending increase, you lose your cap. You're subject to review, you probably lose your cap. You never get it back. So there's an incentive to be above a 5% tax increase and below a 10% per pupil increase, because you don't lose your cap. And if you're in that zone for the next 5 years, you can never have a tax increase over 5%. So say your per pupil spending is a 9% increase, you're going to have a 5% tax rate increase. Say we're an 8% increase, 5. 7%, 5. 6%, 5. So your per pupil spending, you have a zone you can be in, and your tax rate's always going to be capped at 5. So there's an incentive to look at a 9% per pupil increase. When you've got a 16% healthcare cost increase, when you've got, staff raises that are negotiated in a contract at, 4 or 5%, when you look at inflation and the cost of materials going up, a 9% student increase is not crazy to think about when everything is going up a couple percent every year. On the other end, you might say, well, gosh, we want to keep our taxes low, right? So let's keep our district tax rate as low as possible. Well, if you get a 4% district tax rate increase, you saved yourself 1%, and now you don't get that cap for the next 5 years, which is, I think, an interesting scenario. So that's where the legislature has said, we're giving this funding to districts based on student need. If you don't spend it on students, fine, you're good, you need no tech support. So if you have a 4% increase, you must be fine, you get no help for the next 5 years. On the other end, they don't want districts to just ramp up their spending, so if you are over 10% per pupil, then yeah, you probably don't need help either, you're fine. So I think a really confusing system where this starts to bring into play a heck of a lot of uncertainty. Because Stan and I can't sit down today and tell you how to hit that good number. We don't have our per pupil weights yet. We will likely have those December 15th. Gosh, that starts pushing really close to when we need to have a budget to hit statutory timelines to warn it and get it to the public. One more thing, Liz, and then... now, the other thing that brings in uncertainty here is, well, gosh, there's this 5% rate cap, right? What if 80% of the districts in the state have spending over 5%, but they're capped at 5%? Where does the difference come from? Because the state is obligated to fund budgets if they pass. So if you pass a budget that would have been an 8% tax rate increase, but you're capped at a 5% tax rate increase, where's the 3% coming from? Nobody knows right now. The legislature is going to have to figure that out. So when we set a yield December 1, we get an idea of what our pupil numbers are December 15, we can try and have a pretty good budget. But then the legislature is going to go, you know, sometime in the spring when all these budgets pass, they're going to go, how big is the shortfall? And I think it's highly unlikely that there's going to be no shortfall. I think the way the system is set up, they've created incentives for people to try and finesse their budgets in a way that they can take advantage of this. There's going to be a shortfall. So the legislature has to figure out what to do, how to fund it. Could they decide that there's a sales tax increase and that's how they're going to fund it, and the yield doesn't change at all, and our tax rate stays exactly what we thought it was going to be? Maybe. Could they adjust the yield in a large way to cover it? Maybe. So I think that's where some of the uncertainty comes in, because this rate cap is going to create a shortfall, but nobody knows what that shortfall is going to look like yet until all our budgets pass. And that's I think, an interesting scenario to be in when we've got 5 years worth of implications. And while the system hasn't completely changed, we can't be quite as confident in the predictions. So I think that makes our job challenging. Okay, Liz, sorry.
You actually answered my question. It was about there's going to be a shortfall,
Yeah.
then what? So you answered that. One more thing, when does CLA come out?
Probably like January 1-ish, or like a few days before, is that right?
Usually a few days before Christmas.
Okay, I know, like, I believe in years past, we kind of, I don't remember if we talked about it before the new year or after the new year, but yeah, my question was about what do we do, because there's going to be a shortfall, so then what?
And we don't know. That's a legislative decision. That's a policy decision that we have no control over. And there is no provision for how that's going to play out. They got to figure it out. Nick?
Questions.
Yep.
We don't actually set a district tax rate.
Our district tax rate is calculated based on our per pupil spending and the yield. So
Correct, so we don't set it.
we don't set it, but our per pupil spending,
So we can calculate the per pupil spend.
Yep.
So we could say strive for 7.5%. But we can't
then the
say,
yield comes into play.
Then the yield comes
we know what it
in.
is. Yep. Correct. So we can try and target a district tax rate, but we can't control it completely.
Correct.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
and then I guess the
Absolutely right.
second one's maybe a statement rather than a question.
Yep.
In the last 3 or 4 years, the state has taken surplus money
Yep.
to drive down district tax rates.
Yep.
Proposing they hold those monies for this excess.
Could that happen again? Maybe. I don't know.
Well, I'm thinking of this overage. Instead of sending it back, do they just say, hey, we're going to hang on to this because of this unknown?
Oh, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it hard to say.
That happens like roughly at the same time, I think, when they decide the yield, is like roughly the same time, like if the governor is gonna say like, oh, we're gonna spend that, is that roughly the same?
We're gonna
time
send $10 million back to everybody because they have access.
I would hope that the tax commissioner has heard from the folks that would control some of that surplus enough to know that it's likely, because I think back to last year, wasn't there an inkling of that happening last year?
I believe so.
But then it ended up being far more surplus than they thought. But there was an inkling at the time. Didn't the tax commissioner even mention it in his note? Maybe?
Yeah, there was a different point of
And then come to find out they used more than we thought they would use.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically, the forecasts come out December 1st
For the yield.
for the yield.
Yep.
We don't get CLA until, let's say, around the new year.
Yep.
Town meeting is March,
Early March.
first Tuesday in March.
And we've got to warn for our annual meeting end of February.
What is it, 40 days?
40 days.
Prior?
So early January, we need a budget to
Right.
warn to get our 40 days for, so I think we have to work in a way that we have something that we think is going to be pretty darn close. And then we hope we get reasonable
We
information.
can only work with the numbers we have. Often the legislature doesn't decide the property yield or income yield until after town meeting day.
Yeah.
So, when do we get our equalized per pupil count?
December 15 is when
Oh,
we should
December
be able to
15.
know that.
We're working with a lot of variables that,
Yep.
so this is a very interesting budget season.
And just to put in context so folks know what that means, a 5% increase last year, our tax rate, district tax rate, was $1.36 and fraction cents. 5% cap would put that at $1.44 district tax rate, if that makes sense. So whatever that tax rate ended up being, if we were under 10% per pupil increase, that would be the highest our tax rate could go, which is really interesting because, that's a number that we can predict that number reasonably well because there's this 5% cap in place. We just can't predict how close we're going to get to that cap. Does that make sense?
Yeah, who asked about surplus money? So surplus money, we got surplus money most recently in 2019 and 2022 for different reasons. The Joint Fiscal Office for the state of Vermont has a website. You can watch what comes out in terms of reports, and you can watch to see if we have a projected surplus. I haven't looked at it in a while. I'm not certain that I suspect we do, in part because of cannabis sales.
But I thought cannabis retail sales were pretty darn specific to how that funding was going to be spent.
That I
though.
don't know.
Yeah.
It is specific to how it's spent, and I'm
So likely not going
not
to help.
sure it's going
the
to education.
Okay,
So
and we won't know that. That doesn't come out until after town meeting
Yeah.
day, for sure.
So something you've heard from me every time we've talked about budget this year, I keep using this language of a favorable position. Well, there's a reason I don't give you numbers, because we have no idea right now. But we do know that when we look at estimates of our new pupil numbers, when we look at those estimates, it would be highly unlikely that we would get less funding from the state. It would be highly unlikely that we'd get a lot more from the state. It's fairly likely that we're going to get a little more. So that's why we keep saying favorable position. So if we get a little more funding from the state, that 10% increase in per pupil spending is actually going to be hard to do. Because if we're getting more dollars anyway, we're probably going to be under 10%. So if we have modest budget increases, due to inflation, due to healthcare costs going up, things like that, we should actually be, I think, in a really reasonable position where whatever happens with our district tax rate, there's no way it's going to go over 5%. That our prediction right now is that we're going to be fairly comfortable, and we can expect that rate cap. If anything, Stan and I have been talking about, gosh, we might be under 5%. Which, when we're seeing costs that are increasing far more than 5%, you know, like healthcare going up 16%, to be under a 5% increase would be hard to do if the pupil weighting was not putting us in a favorable position. So I think as we are right now, we're looking at a reasonable district tax rate no matter what happens. We were talking earlier today that we had looked last year over the past 5 years or so, and we had an average district tax rate increase of about 2-something%. So we've been fairly fiscally conservative in recent history. So I think we're in a reasonable position going into this. Folks that are going to be losing money are going to be in a tough place, and they got 5 years to transition, and they got some support from the state to do that. Folks that are going to get far more funds than they thought they were going to get are going to have some interesting conversations about how to deal with that. I think our budgeting stays fairly reasonable and fairly normal. And I think we look at a modest budget going into next year. I think right now, talking with Stan, that's been I think the safest approach, and we'll see how that plays out. I do think the biggest question that we have in front of us, though, is being in this favorable position, how do we best support, how do we find a budget that best supports our vision, mission, values? And I gave you that on the last page just so that you had that in front of you. Being in this favorable position, what should we be thinking about? What does that mean for us? What does that mean for our budget? And I think that's squarely in the board's realm of responsibility. Setting a budget that follows through and supports our vision, mission, values. That's one of our goals, budget. And trying to make sure that we've got a budget that supports our schools in a way that we can enact that mission. So, don't expect an answer, but I think that's probably the best place to leave this conversation. Any final thoughts, questions, clarifications about any of that? Budget is not my favorite thing at all, but I think it's a really important thing that we need to be engaged in. Anybody?
No, thank you so much. Brian.
Finance tomorrow night, if anybody wants to dive in and have the conversation. Yeah.
It's like decisions that we would make.
Yep.
And it looks to me like the whole push here, be at 5%, right?
Yep.
And yet we can do what we want to do, and we got no idea whether that's going to be there or not.
Sure.
I mean, because like last year, because you compare it to like everybody's rates last year, 12 and 13% was like pretty common. So for them, I don't know how they're gonna do it, but like getting to 5% is like, oh, look how much we've done. We've controlled everyone down from 12% in a lot of the state to 5%.
Yeah, holy cow, getting to 5% is hard.
And what are our options here if we get way down the road and we go, hell, things are way out of whack here? How do we back up and make changes?
Yeah. What do you mean, Paul?
We do what we're going to do for a budget, and we find out that we are seriously out of whack with their parameters. What's our ability to adjust?
I don't think we
take
can.
A couple years to.
I don't think we can be seriously out of whack. I think we're in a position where if we predict wrong, we can't be so far off that it's problematic for us. I think our worst case scenario is our
Under
district
5.
tax rate is lower than 5%. and we don't get a rate cap for the next 5 years. I think that's the worst that could happen to us, and you go, well, that's not the end of the world. Because actually your tax rate was low, and well, next year it'll probably stay low because you're doing okay as a district. For a district who is losing a lot of funding, they're going to have a really tough 5 years, and they need to make sure that they do things, you know, their worst case scenario is far worse than our worst case scenario. Does that help?
I guess.
Paul?
We're going to be somewhere between 0 and 5, I guarantee. How about
Okay.
that?
All right.
Yeah, Paul, historically, where we are in the budgeting process, we kind of fall smack in the middle. So we're not an outlier.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, we're pretty much, we trend in the
So us
middle.
being low there on that 5%,
Yep.
so we lose our cap, but we don't really worry about it because we don't think it's
Because you
going
were
to
low.
affect us.
Yeah, you were low, so you're fine. Yeah. I think the challenge is, do we want to cut a bunch of things to be below 5? Well, if you cut a bunch of things to be below 5, well, you could have been at 5 anyway. I mean, if we cut and got to 3, well, we could have had a modest budget and been at 5. So I think when I think about vision, mission, values, I think about how do we get the best bang for our buck? Getting the best bang for our buck is a 9% per pupil increase, which is not huge. You know, when you look at everything else going up, a 9% per student increase, your taxes can't go up more than 5%. So let's support our schools in a way that avails ourselves of this tax incentive, you know. But if we have a modest budget, again, worst case scenario comes in at 4%, and we go, oh, guess we're in a much better position than a lot of other people. So,
But the downside of that is then some unknown occurs. Sure. That in 2 years, you're not protected anymore. And for some reason, our costs go up. But generally, that's going to probably be, if it happens to us, it's going to happen to everybody.
so less likely, but it could happen. Yeah, less likely, but it could happen. No, that's a good question, Paul, you know, because I think thinking through really what are the implications, I think that matters.
It just seems like the fog is thick here.
Oh, yeah,
The fog is always thick around budget time.
And it just got thicker. I
Yes.
think that was what we heard from everybody. You know, we took an already complex system and threw a really complex set of stuff on top of it. So yeah, very foggy.
All right.
I hope the board and, you know, the community too is confident that we've been doing our homework and doing our research and trying to figure this out. I'll tell you, it's been hard to figure some of these pieces out. Definitely recommend watch the VSBA webinar, and especially even if you just fast forward to the last half hour of questions, there are a lot of questions from a lot of people that are, you know, similar to the questions you're asking tonight, you know.
All right, let's
Thank
move
you.
on.
I know that was a lot of me talking, and I don't love just me talking like that all the time.
Let's
And I
move
know I
on to the
arrived late,
Tinmouth.
so I apologize.
That's fine, because I got a surprise for you.
But I have something to say.
Okay.
Why can't we look at no increase anywhere?
That would be great.
I just throw that out there. I know healthcare costs are gonna go up. I get that. Mine go up. But I just think we need to look, you know, to me, saying a 5% increase is okay. I'm saying no.
So we can
That's all.
we can look at that, but that means
Yeah,
cuts.
and I think we need to,
That
Brian.
means
I
cuts.
really do. I think we, as a board, need, and we'll be meeting in finance tomorrow night, and I really think the sort of acceptance of 3%, 5% increases is something we need to examine, and that's all I'll
just to
say.
clarify, it is a tax rate increase, not a taxes increase. not a 5% increase in your taxes.
Right.
But a 5% rate increase, and the difference being CLA, that is the variable. So historically, Len, and this is tomorrow night's discussion, we've done target, like 5% or
Right.
9%, totally flat, draconian, well, not draconian, but cuts. We've looked at various budgets to say, what are we feeling? We talk to the public,
Right.
what are we hearing? And then we pick one.
And I know that we're just in the process of that, Liz, and I appreciate that. I'm just throwing out
I
there.
agree, we have to look at all of the scenarios.
Yeah.
We really do.
Stan, if I ballpark something, will you check my math? A 5% to a 0% increase, if we're talking about like 10 cents, is that $1 million? Is that right? Yeah. Okay. So just to throw that context out there, to go from a 5% to a 0%, we're talking $1 million of cuts. Just, so that we can have that conversation.
Yeah, all I'm saying is we need to look at all of the options, and I think that's important. And then we make it known to the community that we are going to look at all of the options.
Well, I would hope that the community knows that we're looking at all of the options regardless
I'm
of
not
what's
sure
not
they are.
being said and what is being said.
I'm not sure that they're aware of
Okay.
that.
Then
I
that's
think-
something we need to address on a whole thing in itself.
And CLAs might be something to be cautious of this year, because prices of everything have gone up since COVID, stuff selling for twice what it was selling for 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, CLAs could really come back to bite us too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I just am asking for us to look at the big picture, that's all.
Oh, I agree with you.
And
So I think that
we can
this
share
should be
what
on-
those cuts would look like. We can absolutely do that like we did
And-
last year. Yep.
Yeah, and we need to be discussing this way more than what we have.
And by all means, everybody who's interested in that conversation, finance is not an exclusive club.
No.
Anybody can attend. Anybody can
Yeah, they let
attend.
me in.
I think we literally begged you.
All right, let's move on, just because I want to keep things rolling. Tinmouth update, space update.
Talked to Maureen yesterday.
I was gonna say,
and-
I'm assuming that's why Maureen's
and
here.
No huge changes. Everything is on track for still January.
Okay.
Perfect.
Great. Busing discussion.
Connie is here, so she can
Yes.
share with us a little bit. And I
We have a
think-
little update, Connie.
And Connie can tell us how things are going and all of that fun stuff, but something that I think the board specifically was curious about when we set this as an agenda item was consolidated, not consolidated. Are we getting to a point where we just need to be consolidated because of?
And what do you need help with?
Yeah, Connie can take over.
Have consolidated bus route in case a driver is out. We take Clarendon East bus route and we divide it over Shrewsbury South, Shrewsbury North, and Clarendon West.
Okay,
I am down 3 drivers
right now,
right now.
for a long period of time, or is this what we've been battling?
We just lost the last one we hired.
Okay.
He took a different position, something that he has wanted all of his life, so I don't condemn him for that, so he's gone. Yeah. So he's gone, but then also one of our other, Bart Elkin, he is done as of Friday for a while, he's having a knee replacement.
Okay,
So I have taken and made it so I have consolidated bus route, I have a consolidated 2 bus route, I have a consolidated 3 bus route, and I'm looking towards trying to find 4 of how I can combine it. The consolidated 2 was taking 5 bus routes and making it down to 3
okay,
so that all of our students have also throw in the mix of after-school activities. Music has been put on the wayside for
Our sports.
many years.
And the feedback that I've heard from other people that Connie might not share is that, gosh, we can actually run field trips and we can make these things work because Connie is busting her rear end to problem solve and make things work. So I want you to know that, even though she's not going to tell you that.
We did not use a Premier bus or a South Limo this fall. I made sure.
For sports or for any reason whatsoever?
For any reason. Okay. We never used them. We had our own busing. I would consolidate when needed to make sure that our sports teams and different events get where they need to go. And we will be consolidating tomorrow afternoon because one of our drivers is taking the music department over to Lake George and dropping them off. That means I need to consolidate, but that's just taking the Clarendon East bus and doing away with it and splitting it over 3 buses. And then I will turn around and drive Carol Adams' bus for him.
Oh my God, you should feel privileged that you get to drive Carol Adams' bus.
And then Friday, Rodney is out, so South Wallingford. And we're going to do the consolidated route, so we'll do away with Clarendon East, so that I don't have to worry about driving that, and I can focus on driving the Wallingford South bus.
Okay.
And then Monday and Tuesday, we're going to be going from those 5 routes down to 3.
Oh, that's right.
Because we will be out Rodney and Barb. So I am doing everything.
How many bus drivers do we have? 2?
I think
1.5?
No, like, how many?
7. There's Carol.
7 on a regular basis or 7 with nobody
There's
else?
7 buses that we need to go out.
And we don't have 7 drivers though?
No, we don't.
Okay.
So that's why I consolidate only when I have to.
Okay.
But
does it-
remember, Connie's not a full-time bus driver. She's our transportation maintenance assistant. She drives when we're down.
And we still have
So she's a
Hoffman?
buffer, yes.
We still have Hoffman driving?
She's a buffer to keep our routes from being consolidated first. But then when we're down 2 people or 3 people, that's when we get in rough shape. We didn't have that buffer last year like we do this year.
So does it help you to have a minimum of 1 consolidated route for an extended period of time?
Right now, yes.
just-
Starting on Monday, because we are down, we have a full-time position, a sub-position, and then Mr. Elkin is going out for a new replacement.
So it almost
And
seems like
again,
it makes sense to every day have a consolidated route for some reason or another and just plan on having
And again, I mention it, I've mentioned
consolidated
this
one day.
several
every-
times. I only get 5 or 6 people that tug my shirt sleeve. I'm sure other people do, but those 5 or 6 are saying, geez, one day it's not, one day it is, one day it's not, one day it is. Could it just be consolidated for a month? And then I would know that, hey, it's consolidated.
I think that might be for consistency and it may help you out.
Have to consolidate. But
One way or another, yeah.
Depending on how many trips are scheduled, because we have rock climbing and we have the band and going out for auditions, and we have the fall sports starting, and so it depends on how many buses are going out and who can go out. Depends on which consolidated route I use.
So why don't,
Consolidated routes, then we would either be paying people not to do routes, or
we wouldn't have after-school stuff going on with our buses.
And then somebody's absent and go further down the hole, right?
Well, we would end up having to cancel bus routes if I did consolidate.
Okay,
I don't
so,
want to be like some of the other communities that just call you up in the morning and say, your bus route is running today.
no, we can't do that to our community. So, on every day, like Nick has said, can we plan for you too, regardless of what you're thinking, you know, like today we can have full, tomorrow we can have not. Can we just have a consolidated route in some purpose, some way or another, every day? The night before, we email and say, this route's consolidated, blah, 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 this is what happened. So that we can expect every single night to get an email saying that there's some route consolidated? So we have a little consistency, too?
If I can give you just consolidating Clarendon East, that's one driver out. But if we have 4 trips, then
I know.
I have to go to one of the other consolidated routes I have, so that nobody gets left out. The sports don't get left out, the music, the drama, all of the kids.
So
We need another driver.
We can minimize.
Right, Connie?
We can minimize that, but we can't guarantee that, you know, if we said tonight, like, okay, we'll just do consolidated routes for 3 months and we won't bug anybody, then
No, and I'm
somebody's
not
gonna
even
get sick
talking
and,
about
yeah.
bugging people or not bugging people. If you're a parent of the district, you're looking for all of that stuff when it comes out.
Yeah.
That's not my point. My point is to, and I think Nick is also trying to make this point, is that we're trying, and why we wanted the update tonight was we wanted to hear from you, Connie, and saying, I have to do this because honestly, had no clue you were doing it because of sports events that you were taking people to, or the band stuff. I thought you were doing it because drivers were calling out. Had no idea you're doing it because we're busing all of our extra stuff.
That's just an added layer of,
Extra stuff, but we also have, I just had that new driver come in. He was here 1 week.
I know.
And he's gone. I had 2 other drivers at the beginning of the year. One lasted 8 days and the other one lasted 2 months or a month. And he's gone.
Connie has been recruiting people like crazy. It's just, it's hard to keep people.
Well, it's just an impossible job. Like, you have
It
to be
is.
very specific to be like, I can do this job for a very amount of time in the morning and the afternoon. There's not that many people that fit that anymore, that can't just go make money driving a truck.
Which is why we always, back, and I'm gonna date myself to when I went to school here, they were farmers.
Sure.
Because morning milk,
But
drive a bus, go back and do the rest of
There's not
it.
that many dairy farms anymore.
I
so
know.
there's just-
Well, and we've tried that conversation of, if you drive a bus, you can work maintenance for us during the day. You know, we don't have people that want to do that. Actually, some of our current people who have done that don't like doing that, which is interesting.
Well, it breaks up your day and
Yeah.
when you're stuck in something.
Well, I've had-
So what do you need from us, Connie?
There, that's the
That-
question, is
seriously?
to ask Connie,
What do you need from us?
running the show, no.
Put your feelers out there and find me bus drivers. We have the program to be able to put somebody through a Class B CDL.
Yeah.
And then to go on and do the 3 classes needed for a school bus license.
Here's what I would like. You make up your dream sheet. I mean, we're talking about budget, hello?
Yes.
And I know bus drivers are nowhere to be seen. But if you could put together your dream sheet, if you will, and let us know what that is. And I know we're not gonna be able to fill it, but at least give us some idea of,
I need
So-
2.5 more drivers.
so to ask that slightly a different way.
Connie's been working with BJ to
If
work
we
something
were to
up
have-
visually to do. Yeah.
And you could say it in just a couple of words, or you could email it to us, or in my head, I'm trying to figure out, like, there's not the dairy farmers anymore, but we have a tremendous amount of retired UPS people. We have retired FedEx people. We have people that are in this industry that may be interested in picking up a few part-time hours. Can we take those people and train them and say, you used to do this, now you can do this?
We've got the funding for
They already have Class B.
two drivers. We've had it in the budget for years, and we had people almost sign on last year, at the end of last year, and then found something else. So we can, Stafford runs the courses, you know,
Yeah, that's
pretty,
Stafford's,
yeah.
Class C, or Class B CDL is a rolling enrollment. So
Yeah.
if I can find somebody, you can get me somebody, please. We can get them enrolled and we can get working with them. And I mean, I did my Class A CDL and my bus license in 8 months.
Can this go out also? I asked Brian if we could put this out on our Facebook page. Can we also put this out through principals to the local schools, communities? What about in,
They're all struggling, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
right, but just to like
But I
get the
mean-
word out.
Yeah, because our neighbors are canceling routes
Yeah.
sometimes. You know, and Connie said that's not where we ever want to be, but that's where folks are, unfortunately.
So 20, I'm gonna date myself. 20 years ago, when I was a para at Mill River, Mr. Bird, our math teacher at the
Yep.
time, he drove the bus.
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
that, I mean.
He drove the bus as recently as 10 years ago. Yep.
Oh,
He did.
okay. So, you know, what about putting it out to staff?
I think it's the, I think
I think we already looked at that and we don't have.
Mike was the rare
He was the
guy
only-
who he had done it for years, and Mike, you know, to this day, I'm sure if you see Mike, he's busy doing something
He's a
because he
superstar.
doesn't sit still. Yeah, he's
doing
always,
something.
he's always pitching in, doing
there,
something
yes.
somewhere. Yeah, yeah. You know, I really think, we put things out to, like our para educators to drive a van in the morning, because we've got vans. So you go, well, a van could pick several kids up, and that could support, you know, if we have to. We got 2 vans. There you go.
Do that this year. We've never had this steady except last year. I hired a minivan driver. That's all he does. He comes into the school, he goes out and picks up the kids that need to be brought into the school in the morning. Then he leaves, he's got about 3 hours of his own time. Then he comes back and he goes with Pathways and takes them to their jobs at Hannaford's and at Tractor Supply. He comes back and picks up another student that doesn't have afternoon classes, takes him to South Wallingford. He comes back and he's available to do all of this. Then he picks up the Pathways again, brings them back to the school, picks up another student that can't be around a lot of other
We're getting far better use out of our van.
He takes that student home, he comes back to the school, he loads up the high schoolers, and he leaves to take them home for the day, and then he parks the car usually around 3:30, 4:45.
But for something you can do without a CDL license, we don't have staff paraeducators interested in, hey, you could drive the van at the start of your day, at the end of your day, you know, and make a really reasonable wage for that hour and that hour. We don't have people that want to do it. Connie had to look outside of school to find somebody just to drive the van, and that's no CDL required.
So why don't we,
I'm also going to go to unemployment and go to their next job there,
yes,
so that,
should be coming up soon.
yeah.
If
Connie's
not,
been recruiting. She's been beating the pavement.
I have a connection at unemployment, and I'm gonna go to her and find out, because she's the one that helped me get my Class A CDL when I worked at GE, and I gave up GE for Mill River, which I'm glad I did, but
they have lots of connections in the state building, so we can definitely start there. So why don't we leave this kind of, because I'd like to keep going.
I got one more.
Okay, Nick.
Thank you. I don't
Yes.
want to have this as a point
I was
of
getting to that.
beating you up. It's just feedback and information and trying to help and assist. You're doing great, so.
I think you should be commended because you have the kind of job that nobody up here would challenge. I don't think they'd take it. Come to school every day, you don't know if you got a bus driver or not.
Yeah.
So I think for what you got to work with, you're doing a heck of a job.
I also treat my bus drivers nicely this time of year. I do their engine checks. I start their bus, so their buses are warm when they get there. The windshields are clear, and they're able to just go into the bus routes.
Thank you.
Connie cares about what she does, and when we hire people that care about what they do, we hire great people, you know, and I think that's
So
what it
can we
is. She
leave
cares.
this, that we will help you advertise for bus drivers? Can you type up some sort of advertisement or whatever and then email it to all of us? And then that way we can get it out in whatever forum we have.
Yeah,
And
I would
connections
share
we
it with a
have.
couple of retired people I know.
I was gonna say, I have family that retired from GE and UPS and stuff, so.
Well, my mini is a 42-year retiree from GE.
Yeah. So we got plenty, so yeah,
He doesn't want to drive a school bus with that many kids.
yeah. If you can just, get us stuff and we'll help you get the word out and stuff, but, and then we'll probably, have a little update and let you talk to us about plan for, towards the end of the year, plan for next year.
My door is always open, extension 265 at school. And email me, because I will respond to emails up to probably 9 o'clock, but most of the time I'm out by 6:30.
All right. Thank you very much, Connie. All right, so on to substitute pay proposal, and I'm assuming that's why Stan's here.
Actually, I'll do this one. I don't mind doing it, unless you wanna.
Oh, that's under here.
I was going to, but, okay. Stan's here to make sure I don't mess up any of the budget stuff, because he does know it far better than I do. He really does. I mentioned this last time, we had looked regionally, and, a big conversation we've been having with our leadership team is staffing. Just like Connie's sharing about hiring bus drivers, hiring paraeducators, hiring special educators, even just classroom teachers, where years past, you didn't have to worry about hiring a classroom teacher. You'd have candidates. We are really in a place where we're feeling staffing shortages everywhere. So we looked at regional rates, and our proposal here is bringing us into basically the average of the region. We're behind the region in how we pay our subs, so we wanted to at least get to the average of the region. So I would request a motion to approve these increases in our sub pay.
I'll make a motion as presented, as seen here.
I'll second it.
Any questions, any comments, any?
All in favor? I think you're good.
Thank you.
Okay, so next is board vacancy update. So the Shrewsbury Town meets tonight. So we are hoping to have a recommendation by Friday, as we have a special 20-minute virtual meeting planned for Monday at 4, with hopes that we have something from the select board.
And I double checked, Friday was the deadline we gave them.
Yep, so that's all we've got on that. So stay tuned. The next is Personnel Committee.
Hey.
Hi.
We've got
We have
just
some
the,
contracts, right, from
just
Kim?
the coaches from Kim, yep.
And I don't have them in front of me.
I do.
Oh,
Do you want us
somebody
to?
does.
Do you just want me to, like?
Yeah,
You send
no,
it.
just.
Well,
group 'em.
no, it usually what we do.
Can
it
we
was
group them?
Middle school, I think,
This
middle
is-
school and elementary school.
Yep, so it's
Yep.
elementary sports for winter, so basketball, cheerleading, and that's it for elementary school.
Yep.
We've got JV basketball volunteer, an assistant for snowboarding, middle school boys basketball, and then wrestling for middle school volunteer.
And I don't think anybody is new.
So I
Oh,
would make a
yeah.
motion that we accept those coaching positions as
Coaching,
recommended
yeah.
by our AD, Kim Maneri.
I'll second that.
Any discussion on them?
Well, we need a second.
Nope, we had.
We did.
Liz.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Liz. All right, all in favor of those contracts? Okay. We don't have anything else,
And
right?
personnel will be meeting.
December 6th.
6th, is it?
Or 6th, I think it
At
is.
6:30.
At 6:30, yep.
Okay, so next is policy. Do you remember?
I'm way too old to remember.
I know. Because I was,
Okay, so what we had done, we're trying to consolidate the policies. So A1, A2, and A4, and A5 are up for a second reading to adopt. So I don't know that we need to do anything.
It's 1, it's 1, 2, 3, 5.
Right.
yep.
So I don't think we need to do anything there. Because they've already been put out for the
They were
first
already
reading.
out, yes.
3,
So now it's just a second reading,
Yep.
1, 2,
But-
4, and
and we would adopt those. What's this mean?
The time frame thing that we were running into with the Herald, but I think we're good now. We're caught up.
this is currently
Yeah, we always have to skip a meeting now.
Exactly.
Right.
So I
These are ones that
think,
we talked- That was like, there are two policy meetings, or two reading, two,
Two
Board
board meetings.
two board, yeah, we were, so,
I think those ones are okay.
yeah.
So we don't need to have a motion or an approval for the second reading, do we?
Not for the second reading, but we have to make a motion to adopt.
Yeah, we don't,
Okay.
yeah, we need a,
So then, all the pressure's on Lenny. I would make a motion that we adopt A1, A2, A4, and A3. No.
I said it wrong.
A1,
It's on the
A2,
agenda.
A4, A5, I'm sorry.
Yep.
it's right here written.
Yeah, okay. My, my eyes. I only have 4 of them. So I would make a motion that we adopt A1, A2, A4, and A5 as presented.
I'll second that.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Somebody throw rocks at me if I'm
Are
wrong.
we also doing H7 and H8
Wait, we're getting there.
together?
We'll get to those.
We're getting to
Okay,
that.
thank you. So I will second that motion.
Thank you. Discussion. All in favor? Hoorah. Okay. So now, policy H7
H8.
and H8.
Did I bring it?
H7.
Oh, those are for second read too.
Yeah, those are second read to adopt as well.
We could have
And
lumped,
then
we could have lumped
A3
those in.
is a second read.
But
To
it's like a
rescind.
different
To rescind.
philosophy, right? So the other ones, at least, we're just trying to consolidate into those As.
Yes.
But H7 and H8 formally G12.
Need to be adopted
They need
Yep.
to be adopted.
for a first reading.
They need to be,
They went out for first reading.
Okay.
Right?
They're back.
back.
Yeah, they're back. So we need to adopt. We have the time now.
So moved.
Sounds good to me. No, it doesn't work that way, though.
A3, we're removing.
A3 has already been second read, so we need to, so A3, I make a motion to rescind.
Yeah, did we vote on H7, H8?
The H7.
I know, but I
Doing
think we finished
H7 and
it.
H8.
No,
We need
Didn't get a
to
second.
follow protocol here.
Yeah, so we're making the motion.
We got a
So the
second.
motion was
Adopt
made
H7 and
to
H8.
accept H7 and H8. And that was seconded.
Okay, our
Discussion.
discussion. And I didn't think
All
there
those
was-
in favor? Opposed, da-da-da. And then the next thing would be H7, H8 is done.
A3.
A3, second read to rescind, right?
Right.
And I would make that a motion.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Liz. Discussion.
This is just more consolidation of
Yeah.
getting rid of A3 and putting it into.
What eventually what you're gonna have is what was in our policies is A, B, and C is going to all be under A, which is board operations. That's what we're trying to do. So this will enable us to do that. And then, at the next policy meeting, Andrea is gonna lead us into D, which is personnel.
Yeah, which will then be B.
D to B,
Yeah, which will then be B, right?
Right.
BB. It will all make sense.
later.
when we have it all together and we can lay it all out.
Yeah. So,
Trust me.
All those in favor?
Yeah, we got a
We need to
motion.
vote
so,
for this one.
A3, second read to rescind, that was, motion was made, seconded, discussion. All those in favor? Okay.
Next meeting is December 12th at 5:30
At Mill River?
at Mill River with a hybrid option. So I can totally forget for half an hour.
I was real close, don't worry.
Buildings and grounds.
Buildings and Grounds did not have a meeting. When it was scheduled, we didn't realize that Tim was gonna be on vacation, and sort of hard to have that meeting without him. So I plan on reaching out to him when he gets back from vacation on Monday, and hopefully reschedule, so to be updated at some
Continued?
point. Yes. There you
Okay.
go.
Community engagement.
Community engagement is having our next meeting 2 weeks from today, the 29th at 6 PM.
11:29 at 6. Okay. Negotiations.
I think we're getting closer to starting here pretty soon.
Yep, Union had just reached out, gosh, was it Monday?
Yeah, it was Monday.
Tuesday?
On Monday
Okay,
it was,
Monday.
yeah.
Union had just reached out and let us know that their team is just about set and that they're gonna be letting us know times when we can meet. Good that the union is trying to involve more people, because historically, it's been a few people who are always involved, so I think an organization always does better when more people are involved. So glad to see that they're working in some new people into the team, but that just means it's taken them a little while to get that team settled, so.
We should have an update by hopefully the next
Yeah.
board meeting.
Okay. Finance.
Good evening, everyone. We have the following payroll and pay warrants for approval. For payroll, we have regular payroll in the amount of $6,858.38. We also have regular payroll in the amount of $632,285.29, for a grand total of $639,143.67. For pay orders from the general fund, we have a pay order in the amount of $406,815.17. Also from the general fund, we have a pay order in the amount of $3,000 $946.95. From the general fund, we have a pay order in the amount of $64,486.54. From our after-school program, we have a pay order in the amount of $8,097.84. And from our lunch program, we have a pay order in the amount of $4,116.03, for a grand total of $487,462.53. From our student activities account from Mill River, we have one pay order in the amount of $1,594.54, and I move that we accept and approve payroll and these pay orders as presented.
I will second it.
Thank you, Cindy. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of accepting payroll and these pay orders as presented, thank you very much, everyone. And we are next meeting tomorrow at 4 p.m.
Okay. Thank you. Now we are on to other legal business.
Talk about what we talked about. The Code of Ethics.
Yeah.
Why not?
So I brought it up in policy, and then we kind of decided that we didn't actually have to enact a policy to do what we were thinking about. So in our bylaws, I think it says we're all responsible for meeting the Code of Ethics that the Vermont School Board Association has. And it's one of those things where I hadn't seen it until I accidentally found it. And so what I was suggesting is that every time we do reorg after the election, that first meeting, we all get presented with the Code of Ethics and we sign it. And then we also talked about that would also be a good time for us to talk about part of those policies that we all just consolidated, to make sure that we understand as a board some of those board policies.
A policies,
You know,
the
yeah, the A
board
policies.
operation policy.
And so, like, for Brian, what that we would ask you to do is in your, how you do your yearly chart of what meetings are gonna be.
Work in a board education piece on the A policies.
Right, and
Yeah.
so make sure that on that, make sure that that VSBA thing also gets included in, if there is a new board member, and then just make sure we have that on the schedule, that this is the thing that we're gonna talk about.
And you want that, you just want it to be scheduled after reorg?
That, like that
Or
first.
the reorg meeting?
That reorg, yeah, that meeting, just as.
Yeah.
Because we're all, like, because we were talking about, we all get sworn in, we all do
Yeah.
that stuff. It's a thing in our bylaws that we should do, that we're supposed to be aware of, but it's just nice to just have it be redone. And just another thing of just focusing of
Yeah. And
our responsibilities.
Reorg kinda ends up being a short meeting because you have so much to do with reorg that you can't really do much else, but it doesn't take 2 hours. So I think adding in, like, let's just go over the A policies at the end of that meeting. I think that's-
And we talked about, rather than making it a policy,
the
Code of Ethics, it would just be easier to make it, it's part of the should be part of the procedure.
Okay, I got a note on my annual, so we'll do that. Awesome, good thoughts.
Yeah.
Agenda building for December 6th, which there's also the winter concert for band that
Always
night.
winter concert, December 6th.
So Nick and I will not be
Yeah.
there. Unless Nick wants to pop back and forth, but I'd rather just sit and.
I mean, we've got a funky month anyway, so we could adjust to the 13th. I mean, I don't know if that's something folks want to think about.
On December 6th?
Yeah, instead of the 6th, the 13th.
But then we would only have one.
Yeah, because then you probably
only have
wouldn't
one
want to meet the 20th. The 20th is that kind of funny meeting where it's like we're on break Friday, so meeting on Wednesday right before break.
I mean, it's fine, there's only a couple of,
Yeah.
I just will not be.
On our schedule, Trying to think. Yeah, with budget, I don't know. I think meeting the 6th, just with budget work that we have to be doing.
I think we should keep it the way it is.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
I'll be
just
here,
keep
I can
it-
run the
yeah.
meeting, so, okay.
Matt will be here,
Yeah,
so.
I'll be here, so.
So what we have on the tentative schedule, equity policy update, our annual one there. And tentatively, I had math and science Mill River, because we'll be back at Mill River, so to hear from those folks again. Those are the only two big things I've got. I wonder if we'll have a budget update, maybe.
We'll have a Tinmouth, or Shrewsbury, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, do you think we need that? We'll have a member joining us,
Hopefully.
potentially, so yeah.
Yeah. So put that on, because there could be,
Yep. I mean,
because
no.
that person's gonna,
What am I thinking? We'll definitely have a budget update, because that's after December 1st. So we will definitely have a budget
Yes.
And I
update.
think to Len's point of having the discussion, if it is a short meeting, I think it's appropriate that the financial part takes longer. Like we
Yeah,
can just
sure.
talk about it more.
Sure.
And talk about. Sure. Because I mean, there's an audience for the finance meetings, but there's in theory a bigger audience for this.
Yeah.
and
So-
talking about the new member, they will need to be put on committees
Yep. Oh, yeah, good point.
for
So
the
I'll
fill,
put
so we
committee-
don't have one stretch so far.
And that has to be full board action, so we gotta have that on the agenda. Good,
Yes, so
good.
that needs to be on, because that person will have to.
So I got math, science, Mill River, equity, budget, committee, member, reorganization. Missing anything?
One question I would have, it seems like the last 2 school visits we've made,
Yep.
we've heard para shortfalls.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's just a hiring pool, or can we get some type of update on
Yep.
how short are we, and
Yep.
what can
Yep,
we
yep,
do
yep.
to close the gap?
In terms, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Mike.
Para.
Para education?
Yeah, I can,
Because I was just gonna say the same thing.
It seems like the last couple of visits we've made were, hey, we're short paras, we're short paras, we're short paras.
Well, and the conversation I had after the meeting tonight with the young lady who was there, who's a teacher in
Wallingford.
Wallingford.
I forgot her name
And
though.
that's, but, and I don't remember either, but that was her whole emphasis.
Yeah.
And also, and no offense,
She's shaking her head.
I dressed it in my thing.
it's
It's got a big asterisk next to it. I wrote it down.
Bus drivers, I mean, it's
Hey,
like-
Jane and I were having a blast here by ourselves.
I can give you information on here's what the shortage really looks like, and I can give you information on here are the conversations we've been having leadership team, here's some of the things we've tried to do to address those. Subpay today was one of the strategies we talked about. Let's do something. What can we do? So I can definitely bring you some stuff to share what we've been working on.
And do we need to look at what we're paying paraeducators?
Yeah.
And I know that's part of the contract discussion.
And-
I get that, I
And
know
we
that.
talked about that, and that's a next year renegotiation. That's
Yeah,
next year.
Yeah, I just think we need to make ourselves more attractive to paraeducators than we are right now.
Yep.
That's all. And I'll be
Okay.
quiet now.
I just shut mine. Do we need an executive session?
None that I am aware of.
All right, so adjourned at 8:50.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.